The celestial conflict ended 17 years ago on the frozen plains of Corvith Prime, where human soldiers died by the thousands and alien refugees fled through corridors of fire and ice. History recorded that day as the armistice of broken shields, the moment when humanity officially withdrew from interstellar warfare and chose isolation over extinction. History also recorded that Lieutenant Tyson Hope's, callsign Last Wing, perished holding the evacuation corridor open while 3,000 Valorian civilians escaped the orbital bombardment. His battalion, the legendary Hope's Regiment, named after his grandfather who founded it, was declared extinct. No survivors, no remains, just a crater where heroes once stood. History, as it often does, got it wrong. Lyrian Station hung like a frozen jewel at the edge of the Tessera Nebula, its docking spires catching the pale light of 3 distant suns. The station served as neutral ground, a place where 17 species conducted trade, negotiated treaties, and pretended not to hate each other. It was also the only place in known space where a human could disappear completely. Tyson Hope's had been disappearing for 17 years, and he had gotten remarkably good at it. At 43 years old, he moved through the station's lower maintenance corridors like a ghost. His dark hair had developed streaks of grey at the temples, and his broad shoulders carried the weight of memories he refused to discuss. He wore the standard uniform of a Class 3 mechanic, reinforced brown work jacket with orange indicator lights, heavy boots magnetized for zero-gravity work, and gloves that had been patched so many times they were more repair than original material. The only unusual element was the old plasma torch hanging from his belt. Military grade, 17 years outdated, still functioning perfectly. Mr. Hope's. The voice belonged to Grentic, a Thessian dock supervisor whose 4 eyes blinked in rapid sequence whenever he was stressed. Currently, all 4 were blinking like warning beacons. Mr. Hope's. The Valorian diplomatic vessel just docked at Bay 17, and their primary manifold is leaking plasma coolant everywhere. Tyson finished sealing the fuel line he was working on before responding. Bay 17 is Korvax's sector. Korvax refuses to touch Valorian technology, says it makes his scales itch. Please, Mr. Hope's, this delegation is important. The High Consul herself is aboard. Tyson's hands did not shake. He had trained them not to shake 17 years ago, and they had obeyed ever since. But something cold settled in his chest at the word Valorian. Fine, he said, and began walking toward Bay 17 without another word. The Valorian vessel was elegant in the way that only ancient civilizations produced. Smooth curves of crystalline metal, surfaces that seemed to absorb and redirect light, and engine configurations that human engineers had been trying to reverse engineer for centuries. Tyson had seen ships like this before, usually burning as they fell from poisoned skies. He pushed the memory aside and focused on the plasma leak. The manifold coupling has degraded, he said to nobody in particular, already reaching for his diagnostic scanner. Probably hit microdebris in the Tessera passage. I'll need to fabricate a replacement seal. 3 hours, maybe 4. The delegation's schedule requires departure in 2 hours. The voice came from behind him, melodic, precise, and carrying the unmistakable harmonics of Valorian speech. Tyson turned, and for the first time in 17 years, his hands almost shook. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet, standard for her species, with skin the color of deep emerald, luminescent in the station's artificial lighting. Her hair cascaded past her shoulders in waves of silver white, and her eyes were large, slightly elliptical, catching light like mercury pools. Bioluminescent tattoos traced patterns across her cheekbones and down her neck, shifting slowly like living constellations. She wore diplomatic robes of silver and white that marked her as a member of the Valorian High Council. "I can work faster," Tyson said, turning back to the manifold, "but I won't compromise safety. The plasma containment in these older models, you know, Valorian engine design." It was not a question. "I've worked on a few." Interesting. Most human mechanics refuse our contracts. Something about uncomfortable memories. Tyson said nothing. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. There, that phrase he hated, but it was accurate, isolating the damaged coupling and beginning the fabrication process for a replacement seal. "I am Prelara Windstorm," the Valorian said, "High Diplomat of the Nebula's Council. And you are?" "Tyson. Just Tyson. Just Tyson." She smiled, and it transformed her face into something almost warm. "A pleasure to meet you, Just Tyson. I shall leave you to your work." She did not leave. Instead, she watched him work with an intensity that made the hair on his neck stand up. Tyson had been watched by many people over the years, supervisors checking his credentials, engineers curious about his methods, the occasional bounty hunter following a cold trail. But Prelara Windstorm watched him like someone trying to solve a puzzle that had been bothering her for a very long time. "Your technique," she said finally, "it is unusual. It works." "That is not what I meant. You handle our technology as if you have trained with it, as if you understand its principles rather than merely its mechanisms. I read a lot." She tilted her head, and her bioluminescent tattoos pulsed brighter for a moment. "I wonder what else you have read, Just Tyson, and what you have chosen to forget." She left then, her silver robes whispering against the deck plates. Tyson finished the repair in 93 minutes, collected his standard fee from a grateful Grentic, and walked back to his workshop at the far end of the station's maintenance sector. He did not think about emerald skin or silver hair or tattoos that moved like stars. He thought about absolutely nothing at all. The workshop occupied a forgotten corner of Lyrian Station's lower decks, accessible only through a series of corridors that most station residents did not know existed. Tyson had paid for this privacy in 17 years of reliable work and careful bribes to the right administrators. Here, among the spare parts and salvaged components and half-repaired engines, he could almost pretend to be the person he claimed to be. Almost. The armor stood in the corner, hidden beneath a thermal tarp and surrounded by enough clutter to discourage casual exploration. Tyson had not touched it in years. He could not bring himself to destroy it, and he could not bear to repair it. So it remained, a monument to everything he had been and everything he had failed to save. He was recalibrating a navigation module when he heard the footsteps. They were too light to belong to Grentic, too confident to belong to the usual delivery workers, and too deliberate to be accidental. "Your door was unlocked," Prelara Windstorm said from the workshop entrance. "I hope you do not mind the intrusion." Tyson set down the navigation module very carefully. "The diplomatic vessel departed 6 hours ago. I saw it leave." "Yes, and then it returned. Our negotiations have been extended." She stepped into the workshop, her eyes sweeping across the organized chaos with obvious curiosity. "The station administrator mentioned that you are the finest mechanic on Lyrian, perhaps in the entire sector. He also mentioned that you appeared here 17 years ago with excellent credentials but no verifiable history. Privacy is valuable out here. Indeed it is." She paused near a shelf of reclaimed engine parts, her fingers brushing across a plasma regulator that still bore scorch marks from an ancient battle. "I noticed something during your repair work today. Your hands move in patterns I have seen before, military patterns, specifically the maintenance protocols taught to human soldiers during the Celestial conflict. Lots of veterans became mechanics after the war. Yes, but few of them understand Valorian technology well enough to improvise repairs without reference materials." Her eyes met his, and there was something ancient in their depths. Something that had seen too much death and learned to recognize its survivors. Few of them carry military-grade plasma torches that were standard issue for the Hope's regiment. Tyson's hand moved involuntarily toward the torch at his belt. Where did you hear that name? I have studied the celestial conflict extensively. The Hope's regiment was legendary, human soldiers who refused to treat Valorians as enemies, even when ordered to do so. They protected our evacuation routes. They died ensuring our civilians could escape, her voice softened, including me. I was a child then, barely 15 cycles old. I remember the human soldiers who held the line at Corvith Prime. I remember their commander, a young lieutenant with dark hair and sad eyes who personally carried wounded Valorians to the transport ships. That man died. That is what history says. She began walking toward the corner of the workshop, where the thermal tarp did an increasingly poor job of hiding its contents. History says many things. History says that no human would dare keep a piece of the celestial conflict as a memorial. History says she pulled back the tarp. The armor had been magnificent once, built from composite alloys that could withstand plasma fire and kinetic impacts, designed to enhance human reflexes and strength to match alien opponents, painted in the dark blue of the Hope's regiment, with the family crest emblazoned across the chest. A rising sun over an open hand. Now it was broken. The left arm hung at an unnatural angle, torn nearly free by an explosion. The chest plate bore a crater where something had punched straight through. Scorch marks covered every surface, telling the story of a warrior who had stood against impossible odds and refused to fall. Prelara's hand covered her mouth. Her bioluminescent tattoos flared bright with emotion, shock, recognition, something that might have been wonder. "The armor of Last Wing," she whispered. "The armor, they said, was vaporized in the orbital strike. Put the tarp back. You survived." She turned to face him, and there were tears forming in those mercury eyes. "You survived, and you have been hiding here for 17 years while my people searched for any trace of the hero who saved us." "I am not a hero." The words exploded from him with force that surprised them both. "I watched my entire regiment die. My brothers, my friends, everyone I had ever served with, gone in seconds because I was not fast enough, not strong enough, not good enough. I did not save anyone. I just survived. There is a difference." The evacuation records show that 3,000 Valorians escaped through a corridor that one regiment held open for 18 minutes. Do they show what happened to that regiment? Do they show the faces of the soldiers who burned while I somehow kept breathing? He was shaking now, 17 years of carefully maintained composure crumbling in the face of those earnest alien eyes. "I wanted to die with them. I tried to die with them, but the universe has a cruel sense of humor." Prelara said nothing for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her hand over his, her green skin warm against his calloused fingers. "I understand," she said softly. "More than you know, I understand." They sat together among the spare parts and salvaged memories, while Prelara told him about the Valorian side of the war. "We lost 42% of our population in the celestial conflict," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Entire cities vaporized, centuries of culture reduced to debris. My mother was a physician at the medical station on Corvith Prime. She died trying to evacuate patients who could not walk. My father was a pilot. His fighter was destroyed on the second day of the siege. I was the only member of my family to reach the transport ships." "I did not know," Tyson said quietly. "How could you? Humans and Valorians did not exactly share survival stories after the armistice." She managed a small smile. "The irony is not lost on me that I have spent 17 years becoming a diplomat, trying to build bridges between species, while the human who made my survival possible was hiding in a maintenance corridor pretending to be nobody special. I am nobody special. I am a mechanic who fixes engines and avoids questions. You are the man who carried 14 Valorian children through a burning corridor while taking plasma fire from 3 directions." She held up her hand before he could interrupt. I have read the testimonies, Tyson. The survivors remember. The children you saved are adults now. Some of them are parents themselves. They named their firstborns after you in the human tradition. There are currently 37 young Valorians carrying the name Hopes because their families wanted to honor what you did. Tyson stared at her. Of all the things he had imagined might happen if his past caught up with him, and he had imagined many things over 17 years of sleepless nights, this had never been among them. I never wanted recognition, he managed finally, which is precisely why you deserve it. She stood and walked to the broken armor, studying it with an expression caught between reverence and sorrow. This belongs in a museum or a memorial. It is a piece of history that both our peoples need to see. No. Tyson. I said no. He rose to face her, and for a moment the ghost of Lieutenant Hopes flickered in his eyes. The commander who had held a line against impossible odds, the warrior who had refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only rational choice. That armor represents everything I lost, everything I failed. I keep it as a reminder that I do not deserve to forget. But I will not turn my failure into a spectacle for politicians to use in their speeches. Is that what you think I want? Prelara's voice sharpened. To parade your tragedy for political gain? Diplomats always want something. Yes, right now, I want to understand. She stepped closer, and the bioluminescent patterns on her skin pulsed with visible emotion. Frustration, determination, something gentler beneath both. Help me understand why a man who showed such courage has spent 17 years punishing himself for surviving. The silence stretched between them like a living thing. Because I do not remember making a choice, Tyson said finally. When the orbital strike hit, when the fire came down and my soldiers started dying, I do not remember deciding to survive. I remember fighting, and then I remember waking up in an escape pod with burns covering half my body and the sound of screaming in my ears that would not stop for months. I did not choose to live, I just did not die. And every day since then, I have wondered why it was me. Why not Sergeant Kovalev, who had a wife and 3 children waiting for him on Earth? Why not Corporal DeSanto, who was 22 years old and had never even seen the ocean? Why did I survive when better people did not? Prelara reached up and touched his face, a gesture so unexpected that Tyson forgot to flinch away from it. Perhaps, she said softly, you survived so that you could be here. In this moment, asking these questions, perhaps survival is not a punishment but a responsibility, to carry the memory of those who fell and to give their sacrifice meaning through how we choose to live. That sounds like something a diplomat would say. That sounds like something a survivor would say. Her hand dropped from his face, but her eyes held his. I have asked myself the same questions, Tyson, every day since I walked off that transport ship and learned that everyone I loved was gone. But I have also learned that guilt does not honor the dead. It merely diminishes the living. Before Tyson could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the station, the harsh, discordant tone that indicated a security breach. And then Grentic's voice came over the workshop's ancient speaker system, trembling with terror. Mr. Hopes, armed individuals are searching the station. They are asking about the Valorian diplomat. The Restoration Front, Prelara said, her expression hardening into something Tyson had not seen before, the cold calculation of someone who had faced enemies and survived. They are extremists from my own species. They believe that peace with humanity is betrayal, that the armistice was a surrender rather than a treaty. They have been trying to assassinate me for 6 months. Why did you not mention this earlier? Would it have changed anything? Tyson considered the question. No, probably not. Then it was not relevant information. She moved toward the workshop door, her movements suddenly efficient and purposeful. I need to reach my ship. My security detail is already compromised if these extremists got past station security. Tyson pulled out his plasma torch and adjusted its settings. How many hostiles? Unknown. The Restoration Front typically operates in cells of 8 to 12 warriors. She paused, looking back at him with something like surprise. You are going to help me. You seem disappointed. I am. Confused. You have spent 17 years avoiding notice. Helping me will expose you. Probably. Tyson grabbed a maintenance panel and pulled it aside, revealing a hidden corridor that did not appear on any station schematic. But I have also spent 17 years pretending that I stopped being a soldier when the war ended. Maybe it is time to stop pretending. They moved through the station's hidden passages, routes that Tyson had mapped over years of deliberate exploration, meant to provide escape options in exactly this kind of scenario. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of weapons fire and shouting as the Restoration Front soldiers encountered station security. You mapped these routes, Pralara said quietly, as they navigated a junction that required climbing through an access shaft. You planned for this. I planned for something, not this specifically. The soldier never really left, did he? Tyson did not answer. Instead, he held up his fist, the universal military signal for halt, and pressed his ear against a ventilation panel. Voices on the other side, Valorian language, aggressive tones. 2 guards at the next junction, he whispered. They are covering the approach to Bay 17. Can we go around? Not without adding an hour to our route. He met her eyes in the dim light. I can neutralize them. Non-lethally, but it will be loud. Do it. What happened next demonstrated why the Hope's regiment had been legendary. Tyson moved with speed that belied his years of mechanical work, bursting through the ventilation panel and catching the first guard with a precisely aimed stun pulse from his reconfigured plasma torch, before the Valorian could even raise a weapon. The second guard was faster, managing to bring up a crystalline rifle before Tyson crossed the distance between them and applied a technique that human soldiers called the good night handshake. A nerve strike that dropped opponents into unconsciousness without permanent damage. The entire engagement lasted 4 seconds. Pralara emerged from the ventilation shaft and stared at the unconscious guards, then at Tyson, then back at the guards. You could have killed them. Yes, but you did not. They are not my enemies. He checked the corridor for additional hostiles. They are misguided soldiers fighting for a cause they believe in. That does not mean they deserve to die. You are a very strange human, Tyson hopes. So I have been told. They continued toward the docking bay, encountering 3 more patrols that Tyson neutralized with the same efficient mercy. By the time they reached the final corridor leading to Bay 17, the station's alarm systems had changed their tone. Someone had locked down the section. They have anticipated us, Pralara said. We cannot. The blast door ahead of them slid open, and a figure stepped through that made Pralara's face go pale. He was Valorian, older, his green skin showing the darker patterns of advanced age, his silver hair cropped close in a military style. His bioluminescent tattoos were arranged in the pattern of the old Wardens, a class of warriors that Valorian society had officially disbanded after the celestial conflict. His eyes were cold, and the weapon in his hands was pointed directly at Pralara. High Diplomat Windstorm, he said, your family always did have a talent for surviving when others died. Just like your mother at the medical station, abandoning her post while patients burned. That is a lie, Pralara said quietly. My mother died trying to save those patients. Your mother was a coward, and you are a traitor. Peace with humanity? He spat the words like poison. Our people were slaughtered, our worlds burned, and you would shake hands with the species that murdered us? "The humans did not start the celestial conflict," Tyson said, and both Valorians turned to look at him as if they had forgotten he was there. Both sides were manipulated into fighting by the consortium of silent merchants. The historical records proved that decades ago. The old warrior's cold eyes studied Tyson with new interest. "And who are you, human? Another bodyguard for the Diplomat? You move like a soldier." "I am a mechanic." The warrior raised his weapon slightly. "Then you should know when a machine is beyond repair." What happened next would later be described in Lyrian station incident reports as the most inadvisable act of heroism in station history. Tyson stepped in front of Pralara just as the old warrior fired. The crystalline round caught him in the shoulder, not his chest, because he had twisted at the last moment, an instinct honed through years of combat training that his body had never forgotten. The impact spun him around, but he did not fall. Instead, he used the momentum to bring up his plasma torch and fire a concentrated burst that struck the old warrior's weapon, superheating the crystalline components until they cracked and failed. "I spent 17 years fixing things," Tyson said, his voice steady despite the blood soaking his jacket. "Engines, manifolds, navigation systems. Things that other people gave up on. Things that everyone said were beyond repair." He advanced on the old warrior, who was staring at his ruined weapon with disbelief. "You know what I learned? Nothing is ever truly broken. It is just waiting for someone patient enough to figure out how to put it back together." "You should be dead," the old warrior breathed. "That shot should have killed you." "I have had a lot of practice at not dying." Tyson closed the remaining distance and struck the old warrior with a precise blow that sent him crashing to the deck. "My name is Tyson Hopes. My regiment held the line at Corveth Prime while your people's children escaped to safety, and I will not let you destroy the peace that those children have worked so hard to build." The old warrior looked up at him with something that might have been recognition. "Hopes? The last wing?" "Just a mechanic," Tyson said. And then the station security forces finally arrived, surrounding the corridor with drawn weapons and shouting orders that nobody could quite hear over the ringing in Tyson's ears. Pralara was at his side immediately, her hands pressing against his shoulder wound with a field medic's practiced efficiency. "You idiot," she said, but her voice was thick with emotion that had nothing to do with anger. "You absolute, selfless, impossible idiot." Seemed like the right thing to do. Taking a weapon blast meant for someone else seemed like the right thing to do. "I told you, I have had a lot of practice at not dying." He managed a smile despite the pain. "Besides, you still owe me payment for that plasma manifold repair. I would hate to lose a customer." Pralara laughed, a sound that surprised them both. Bright and genuine and completely inappropriate for the circumstances. "You are the most frustrating man I have ever met," she said. "Also, the most charming? I would not go that far." But she was still holding his hand when the medical team arrived, and she did not let go until they forced her to step back for treatment. The recovery took 3 weeks. Pralara visited every day, at first to check on his medical status, then to discuss the ongoing investigation into the restoration front, and eventually just to talk. They shared stories about their lives since the war, her rise through the diplomatic ranks, his years of anonymous mechanical work, the dreams that woke them both in the darkest hours of the night. On the 14th day, Pralara arrived with a package under her arm. "The investigation recovered this from the extremist cell," she said, setting it on Tyson's medical bed. "They had taken it from your workshop. Apparently they wanted to restore it as a symbol of terror, proof that the great last wing had survived, only to become a broken old man hiding from his past." Tyson unwrapped the package and found himself looking at his armor. But it was different. The damage remained. They had not tried to repair it, but it had been cleaned and preserved, treated with compounds that would prevent further degradation. Someone had handled it with reverence rather than contempt. The investigators who recovered it are all children of Corveth survivors, Pralara explained. When they realized what they were holding, they insisted on caring for it personally. They wanted you to know that the armor and the man who wore it means something to them. I do not know what to say. Then do not say anything. She sat on the edge of his bed, her green skin luminescent in the medical bay's soft lighting. Just know that you are not alone anymore. You have not been alone for 17 years. You simply did not allow yourself to see the people who were looking for you, looking for a dead man, looking for hope. She smiled at the unintentional pun. I am a diplomat, Tyson. I've spent my entire career learning to read people, to understand what they want and need and fear. Do you know what I see when I look at you? An old mechanic with too many regrets? I see a man who never stopped caring, who carried the weight of an entire war on his shoulders because he could not forgive himself for surviving, who spent 17 years pretending to be invisible while helping every person who walked through his door. She reached out and took his hand, gently, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. I see someone worth knowing, worth trusting, worth... She paused, her bioluminescent tattoos pulsing with visible emotion. Worth staying for. The negotiations, Tyson said quietly. Your diplomatic mission is complete. Successfully, I might add. The trade agreements between humanity and Valorian are stronger than they have been in decades. She met his eyes, but I find myself reluctant to return home immediately. The station has excellent mechanical services, I hear. Someone who truly understands Valorian technology. For the first time in 17 years, Tyson Hopes felt something that was not guilt or regret or the weight of the past. He felt the possibility of a future. 6 months later, the workshop at the far end of Lyrian Station's maintenance sector looked different. The clutter remained. Spare parts and salvaged components and half-repaired engines still occupied every available surface. But there were new additions. Valorian diagnostic equipment stood beside human tools. Crystalline repair compounds shared shelf space with traditional sealants, and in the corner where the armor had once stood hidden beneath a tarp, there was now a display case with proper environmental controls, holding the broken armor of the last wing, where anyone could see it. A small plaque beneath the case read, "In memory of the Hopes Regiment, who gave everything so that others might live. May we honor their sacrifice through peace, understanding, and the courage to keep building bridges." Tyson stood before the display, his shoulder still aching slightly in cold weather, watching as a group of young visitors, humans and Valorians mixed together, students from an interspecies academic program, studied the armor with expressions of wonder. "You are thinking too loudly again." Pralara's voice came from behind him, followed by the soft whisper of her silver robes against the deck. "Just remembering. Good memories or difficult ones? Both. They tend to come together." He turned to face her, and despite 6 months of seeing her every day, he still found himself amazed that she was here, that she had chosen to stay. Grentic says the diplomatic vessel from Valorian Prime is docking in an hour. Something about preliminary discussions for a joint scientific initiative. Yes, my government wants to establish a research station here, neutral ground for collaborative projects between our species. She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. They asked if I would be willing to serve as permanent diplomatic liaison. And what did you tell them? I told them that I have found something on this station worth staying for. She looked up at him, her mercury eyes holding warmth that had taken months to fully emerge. I told them that I have finally stopped running from my past and started building a future. That sounds like a very diplomatic answer. It is also the truth. She took his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them, the bridge of touch that transcended the differences between their species. You taught me something, Tyson hopes. You taught me that some things are worth waiting for, worth working toward, worth the patience required to repair what everyone else has given up on. I thought I was just a mechanic. You are. She smiled. But you are also the man who never stopped believing that broken things could be made whole. And you were right. The young visitors began filing out of the workshop, chattering in both human languages and Valorian dialects about what they had seen. One of them, a teenage Valorian with her mother's silver hair and her human father's brown eyes, paused before the armor display. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Tyson with the formal politeness of someone who had been raised to respect history. "Are you really him? The last wing?" Tyson considered the question, the same question he had avoided for 17 years. "I was," he said finally, "a long time ago. Now I am just someone who fixes things." "My grandmother was one of the children you saved," the girl said. "She named my mother after you, Hope. It means the same thing in both our languages." She bowed, a gesture of respect that combined human and Valorian traditions, and then hurried to catch up with her classmates. Tyson stood very still, watching her go. "Some machines repair themselves," Prelara said softly, "once you give them time and the right conditions. Is that what happened? That is what is still happening." She squeezed his hand. "Every day, with every choice we make to build rather than destroy, to connect rather than hide, to hope rather than despair." The station's lights shifted as Lyrian moved into the shadow of the Tessera Nebula, painting the workshop in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere in the distance, engines hummed and voices echoed through corridors that connected dozens of species in the endless project of coexistence. And in a workshop at the edge of known space, a mechanic who had spent 17 years running from his past finally allowed himself to imagine a future worth building. 1 year after the Restoration Front incident, the Interspecies Research Initiative officially opened its doors on Lyrian Station. The ceremony attracted representatives from 23 species, media coverage across 6 sectors, and more diplomatic pomp than Tyson had ever wanted to witness in his lifetime. He stood at the back of the crowd, watching Prelara deliver her opening address with the natural grace of someone born for public speaking. Her silver-white hair caught the ceremonial lights, and her green skin seemed to glow with visible pride as she spoke about the future that cooperation could build. "She is remarkable," said a voice beside him. Tyson turned to find Grentic, all 4 eyes fixed on the stage with an expression of absolute wonder. "When she first arrived, I never imagined." "Neither did I." Tyson managed a smile. "But that is the thing about unexpected arrivals. They tend to change everything." The ceremony concluded with applause that echoed through the station's central atrium. Prelara descended from the stage and made her way through the crowd of well-wishers and political allies, her path clearly leading toward Tyson. When she reached him, she was carrying something in her hands, a small box wrapped in Valorian ceremonial cloth. "The initiative's first official project," she said, offering him the box. "The research team thought you should have the honor of seeing it." Tyson unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside the box, resting on a bed of protective foam, was a small device, perhaps the size of his palm, that hummed with gentle energy. It looked like a hybrid of human and Valorian technology, seamlessly merged in ways that neither species had achieved alone. "A universal translator," Prelara explained. "First generation. It draws from research that has been developing since before the celestial conflict. Projects that were abandoned when our species started fighting instead of talking. The team rebuilt it from old schematics and new innovations. They wanted to call it the Hope's Protocol." Tyson stared at the device, something tightening in his chest. I do not know what to say. Say that you will stay. Prelara's voice was soft, meant only for him. Say that you will keep building this future with me. Say that you will give us a chance to see where this goes. Us. Us. She took his free hand in both of hers, her green fingers warm against his skin. I have learned many things in my years as a diplomat, how to read faces, how to interpret silence, how to recognize when someone is afraid of hope because they have been hurt too many times before. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Tyson had ever seen. I have also learned when to stop negotiating and start speaking plainly. Then speak plainly. I love you, Tyson Hopes. I have loved you since the moment you stepped in front of that weapon blast. Perhaps before. Perhaps I have been waiting my whole life to find someone who understands what it means to survive when others did not, and to carry that weight while still trying to build something worthwhile. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. I am not asking you to forget the past. I am asking you to let me share your future. The crowd continued to buzz with conversation around them. Dignitaries and scientists and journalists all caught up in the significance of the day. But for Tyson, the universe had contracted to the small space between himself and this extraordinary woman who had walked into his workshop and refused to accept that broken things should stay broken. You know, he said slowly, when you first arrived at the station, I thought you were just another customer with a damaged ship. And now? Now, I think you might be the best repair job I've ever worked on. He raised the universal translator, its gentle hum a promise of all the bridges yet to be built. Except this time, the repair went both ways. Prelara laughed, that bright, genuine sound that still surprised him every time he heard it. That is the worst romantic metaphor I have ever encountered. I am a mechanic. Romance is not my specialty. Then allow me. She stepped closer, her silver hair brushing against his shoulder, her mercury eyes holding his with absolute certainty. I came to this station looking for trade agreements and political alliances. I found something far more valuable. I found a man who had forgotten how to hope, and in helping him remember, I learned how to hope again myself. That is much better than mine. I have had practice. She kissed his cheek, a gesture that drew several startled looks from nearby observers, but neither of them cared. Now come. The research team wants to meet the man whose name is on their first project. And after that, I believe we have a workshop to return to. Several vessels requested repairs this morning, and I have been told there is only one mechanic on the station truly capable of handling Valorian technology. Just one. Just one. She took his hand and began leading him through the crowd, but perhaps, with time and patience, he might consider taking on an apprentice. Tyson Hopes, the last wing, the survivor, the mechanic who had spent 17 years hiding from a past that refused to stay buried, followed her willingly into the light of a future he had never allowed himself to imagine, because some things he had finally learned were worth coming out of the shadows for. Some things were worth hoping for. The end, a final reflection. Some wars never truly end. They simply change battlefields from the cold void of space to the quiet depths of the heart. Tyson believed that silence was healing, but silence is merely the slowest way to disappear. What he needed was not forgetting. It was someone who could look at his pain and say, I still see you. Prelara saw him, and so she saved him, and so he could save her in return. Because the truth is simple. No machine repairs itself, no heart heals alone, and every one of us is waiting for someone patient enough to help us put the pieces back together.